I'm Todd Jones, recovering from 30 years as a sports writer. Thanks for joining me as I sit down with some of the best sports writers of our time, who knew the greatest athletes and coaches and experienced firsthand some of the biggest sports moments of the past half century. We'll share stories behind the stories, some we've only told each other. Pull up a seat on Press Box Access. Mike Lopresti is kind of like the North Star of sports writing. You always knew you were at a big game or an important event if you looked in a press box and saw Mike. He's probably covered more famous sports moments in the past 50 years than any other writer. Name it, and Mike was there for USA Today. And he was writing the column faster and better than just about anyone. I was fortunate to type alongside Mike many times through the years. You're lucky to hear some of his unique stories. Hey, Mike, thanks a lot for joining us. It's great to talk to you again.
Glad to be here. Good to see you again.
Hey, we're going to get into a lot of sports here today, obviously, and places that you've been, but there's one thing I want to ask you right off the bat. Sources tell me that you once were invited to go to lunch with the actress Diane Lane.
Boy, this is a sad chapter. This was when I was a U.S.
Wait a minute, sad? How can it be sad if it involves Diane Lane?
Because I had to say no. That was the saddest part, yes. Yeah.
So what happened?
Well, they called me. This is when I was USA Today, and it's when the movie was coming out, Secretariat. And they wanted to have, to offer lunch with her and talk about the movie and write a review of the movie. And having lunch with Diane Lane that sounded kind of exciting to me, except I didn't write the movie reviews. Someone else was going to be doing that. So I had, in good conscience, had to call back and tell the PR person, look, I'll be glad to have lunch with you, but I'm not going to be the guy writing the column, so I need to let you know that. So they had to move on to the person who would be doing that. So, yes, I had to turn down Diane Lane.
Mike, you could have called me.
There's a number of people I know I could have called. It's probably just as well because then I sat down at the lunch table, I would have knocked over the soup or spilled something and just come on, looking like some fool. But, that was a tough moment to have to say no.
Oh, man. Well, declining that offer, shows that you're an upstanding, honorable, ethical journalist, which means I don't know what the hell you were doing for 4 decades running around with a bunch of Cretan sports writers.
Well, actually, it wasn't long after that I decided to retire. I figure if you can't have lunch with Diane Lane, it's time to get out of the business. So, kind of the final push out the door.
Well, Mike, in all seriousness, I do know how respected you are among your peers. You always had my total respect. Over the years, we got to know each other covering mutual events. And I always knew it was a big game if Mike Lopresti was there, because Mike Lopresti was always at the big games. And so it kind of like validated my own meek talent that, hey, I'm actually sitting around with Mike Lopresti. This is great. So
I was always a lot better at picking the places to be than writing about them sometimes. Sometimes when I looked at the story I wrote when it was over, I thought, gee, this was a really good event. It's too bad I couldn't have done better at it. So, but I was always good. I was always good at scheduling them anyway.
Well, no. You're being too kind. I think of you as a pro's pro. You were always there. You always beat deadline. You did it with great copy. And I just always enjoyed reading your stuff. And I also think about your dedication. I think about the fact that is this true that you once dictated a game story while being put under anesthesia?
Yeah, I'm afraid so. Probably the best story I ever wrote. I was kind of half conscious when I did. I had covered this goes way back. I was covering a high school football game. And when I was writing it that night at the office, I got a pretty bad stomachache. I thought, well, once again, I've eaten too much pizza in the press box. But this one, I couldn't finish the story, so I went to the hospital and they did some tests and they said, yeah, we need to take you right in and take out the appendix. But no story was there for the paper the next morning. So as I was in the pre-op room and they had given me the one shot where they kind of sort of relax you a little bit before they really get going, I had my notes and I called up somebody in the office. I said, this is going to be a little awkward. It's going to be a little different, but I'm going to have to dictate something to you. So, yeah, it's. I hope I got the score right and the winning team correct. After that, everything would have been gravy on that story.
Well, if you can deliver under anesthesia, then I don't feel so bad about having to write a few with a hangover, So.
Well, I'll tell you, I've never gone back. Well, I never go back and look at any of my stories, but that one particularly I never wanted to see again once it was out there. I have no idea what it sounded like. But
might have been some run-on sentences in that one.
Quite possibly.
Well, Mike, you spent 32 years as a USA Today sports columnist and writing for Gannett News Service. You retired in 2013, but you really didn't retire. You're still writing. You're still cranking them out. You're writing for the Indianapolis Business Journal. You're writing for NCAA.com. So it's great that Mike Lopresti is still in the business. Tell us about what you're doing now.
Well, thank you. Yeah, when I decided to retire USA Today, I wasn't ready to just say, okay, I'm done writing, but I wanted to scale back a little bit. So hey, I lucked out on a couple of things. The NCAA contacted me and wanted me to do some college basketball, features sort of thing and human interest things, which I like to do. So that's kept me pretty busy every college season since then. Indianapolis Business Journal called me up one day and said, we'd like you to do a story. I said, well, I really don't write a lot of business. And they said, no, we want a sports feature every week. So I've done that since 2014.
Well, I'm glad you're still writing. I mean, you retired, but you didn't retire. Well, let's talk about the road a little bit. You were a true road warrior. When I think about the events that you covered in your career, it just blows my mind. You covered more than 40 bowl games, major bowl games. I'm not talking about the Weed Whacker Bowl. I'm talking about major bowl games. 42 Final Fours, 32 World Series, 31 Super Bowls, 31 NBA Finals, 32 Masters, 16 Olympics.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. And when you say those numbers, I think back two things. One, it's a chance to see a lot of moments, to have that in your memory bank that you were there to see that. Although a lot of those moments, I saw about half of them because my eyes were on the computer and the keyboard, a lot of the times, but also the number of places I've been able to travel to and experience that I wouldn't have dreamed of going to. And certainly that starts with the Olympics.
Well, when you were in the bulk of your career, how many nights a year would you be on the road?
It would go between 160 to 180, except on an Olympic year, and it would go over 200. My wife, I lost my wife a year ago, but we were married 44 years. But we were really probably married about 20 because I was gone a lot of the time other than that, but it probably just as well, she was able to take a lot of breaks from me, which was probably good. So, it would be, you go back to the 80s and the Olympics, remember the winter and summer games were the same year. So that would be a really, really heavy year. And you're trying to crowd all that together. I remember one time I was covering the Super Bowl in Detroit, and I was leaving Monday after the Super Bowl for the Winter Olympics in Torino. And I'd got kind of sick during the Super Bowl week. It wasn't anything serious, but it was a nagging something.
No anesthesia this time?
No anesthesia this time, but it gets to be Saturday night, and I'm thinking, I don't want to get on a plane to Italy on Monday, and I'm still feeling this way, and I have no idea what's wrong with me. So my only option by Saturday night is to go to the emergency room at a downtown Detroit hospital. Now, you have never lived until it's midnight on Saturday night in downtown Detroit, and you're in the ER. That was quite the experience. They looked at me and said, well, you got a little virus or whatever, which I thought it was, but at least I could get on the plane to Italy with a little freer mind. So, trying to crowd all those things together could be tough. But, about 160, 180 days a year.
Now, that leads me to this question, and it's a question that I've asked you before, and I want our listeners to hear this. How many Marriott points did you accumulate in your career? Well,
I'm currently holding about just under 2.6 million. Now, I would add a lot. I would add a lot more than that, but I made a deal with my kids that whenever they got married, I would, and I have 3 kids. I would send them on their honeymoon, and it would send them really nice. So my oldest daughter gets married, and they want to go to Maui. So I get in touch with a Maui Marriott there, and I said, okay, how many for a week and this many points? Well, how many if you upgrade the room? Well, this many points. Well, how much if they get a penthouse with this much? And so we went to the top, and that took a big chunk out of them. And same way with the other kids. When my daughter and her new husband checked in the room, and the bellhop said, Michael Vick stayed in this room. Well, I doubt if he turned in Marriott points for it, but I did. But it's the number about traveling with the Marriott that struck me the most more than the points is they keep your lifetime number of nights you stay. And a few years ago, I happened to notice I had passed 2,500 nights. Now, when you think about that, that's spending more than 7 years in a Marriott. So that's quite a bit. It's in fact, not long after that, I was at a bowl game in Florida, and as at a Marriott, of course, and I got in the elevator, and Bill Marriott happened to be in there.
The son of the founder.
Yeah, the son of the founder. And I would normally never, if it was an athlete or a coach, I wouldn't have bothered him. But Bill Marriott, I couldn't let this chance go by. And I said, Mr. Marriott, as a guy who spent like 2,400 nights in your room, in your hotel at that point, can I shake your hand? He goes, hell for that. I'll let you shake it twice. So my great moment at that bowl game was I shook hands in an elevator with Bill Marriott. You can't get a higher. That's almost as good as lunch with Diane Lane. So,
so when you wake up at home in Richmond, you expect there's a mint on your pillow, and you've got a number you can call. They bring you extra towels.
Yeah, the receipt under the door in the morning. They don't do that anymore. I'm showing my age there. But
I always expected when I walked into a lobby of a Marriott that instead of Jay Willard or Bill, a painting of them on the wall, I would see a painting of Mike Lopresti on the wall at the lobby. One time I was driving to Notre Dame for a game, and I got caught in no man's land between Indy and South Bend, and it was late at night. And I thought, well, I'll just pull over, and there was a Fairfield Inn. I'm like, this is it, right? And there's a few other places, but Fairfield Inn, I'm going to get some points. I go in, and the guy says, we got a room, but I got to tell you, we don't have any hot water. And I said, I'll take it.
That's true. They should have given you double points for that, I would think.
Yeah, I should have demanded them.
That's right.
All right, enough of this Marriott commercial. I do want to talk about traveling the world, 3 decades. How many countries do you think? You ever had that up?
No. It would be, I'd have to count the Olympics because there were how many ever I covered in the U.S. and take that number away, and then that's how many countries I went to. So I want to say 10 to 12, I would think. I mean, I started with Sarajevo, was my first Olympics, and probably one of the more interesting just because Sarajevo was as Olympic cities go, it was struggling, not a lot of modern conveniences when you compare to other Olympics. And then what became of Sarajevo long after the Olympics, it became the war zone when they had all the war there. And in fact, where I stayed, I'm pretty sure I found the right spot on the map. It ended up being a sniper's nest during the war. Wow. And the Olympic Stadium where I went to the first opening ceremony ended up being a burial ground for war dead. So when I think back on Sarajevo, that was a really interesting place to go. But so I mean, you think about it, there's China and there's Korea and there's Spain and England and France and Italy, and Greece. I'd have to go from 10 or so, I would think.
What a life. I mean, when you think about it, we were very fortunate. I didn't travel nearly as much as you, but we were fortunate to travel like that, see the world, cover these events. One thing, though, is that we were working, right? Yeah, allegedly. Yeah. And I wanted to ask you about that. What was life like on the road for you as a sports writer, traveling like that? You're away from home, your time clock is all messed up, you're facing deadline. How did you survive that type of travel? Some weeks not very well. A couple of things I always did. Number one, I never changed my watch. Just the idiosyncrasy. Even when I went to the Olympics, even when I went to China, I kept my watch on home time, and just as a way of sort of grounding myself. I always tried to make sure I spent a little bit of time enjoying the city I was in and not just a sports event. It is very easy to fall into a trap that all you do is go from the hotel to the arena and back to the hotel. And I never wanted to, even if I meant getting up very early and before having to go to the ballpark, when I was in San Francisco, and I was there a lot covering different things, I wanted to make sure I got to know the city. When I was in London, I felt that way no matter where I was. So at the end of the day, no matter how tired I was from going to the games, I wanted to be able to say, well, I went to that city too. I just didn't go to the arena. So that sort of kind of kept the juices flowing. I always enjoyed, rather than thinking, gee, I've got to go cover, yet another round of NBA playoffs, I thought, I get to go to Phoenix or get to go to San Antonio. It's a couple cities I really like. So Right.
I tried to think location more than sports events. So that's one thing that got through me.
Any crazy travel stories? Weren't you on a bus once that caught on fire?
That was at the Olympics. Yeah, that was in Vancouver.
Vancouver?
Yeah, Vancouver, coming back from the mountains. Yeah. That's the fastest I moved since I was 50, I think. That
So what the hell happened?
Well, we were just driving down back down the road from the mountain down to Vancouver, and all of a sudden smoke started, some of those buses had seen better days. So, yeah. We were out of there in a hurry, and they said, well, we'll try to find you another bus. Well, that would have been my 15th Olympics, and I knew by then when they start saying, well, maybe we can find you another bus, and it's time to go to plan B. On transportation, so we called a cab out there, and that got us there. So
the Olympic media buses, those were they had a life of their own. I mean, I was on a bus in Sydney, Australia once, about 3 a.m, and everybody's half asleep, and we were flying down this hill, just going like crazy fast, and all of a sudden the bus driver just yells out, "Hang on to something."
Boy, you never like to hear that.
That's not good. Yeah. That's not good. Fortunately, we all live to tell about it.
I think there are some buses in Atlanta from the 1996 games that are still out there trying to find it. Because I was on one time in Atlanta because it became infamous, the number of travel problem stories came out of Atlanta. And one of the problems were a lot of the bus drivers had never seen the city of Atlanta before. And they just sort of gave them a map and sent them on their way. And I remember one time we were lost and kept going around in circles. And finally, the bus driver, a young lady, just put her forehead on the steering wheel and said, "I want to go home." you never like to see that from your bus driver either. So
no, that's not good.
Yeah, they were. And flying. We all have stories in flying. I was on the way to Minnesota one time. It was for the NFC Championship game. It's when the Falcons upset the Vikings, whatever year that would have been. But we took off out of Indianapolis and all of a sudden made a steep turn back to the airport, and the pilot came on and said, "Well, we've got a little problem here. We've got a really overheating engine, and the thing we worry about now is a possible explosion." That one word kind of, got your attention real quick. And then I was sitting near an exit row, and one of the flight attendants came back and sat in a seat right next to me so she could be right at the door. And she said to me, "I've flown 20 years. I've never had to do this before." So, that's...
You're like Chuck Yeager.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I'm Indianapolis Airport looked pretty good. And I eventually did get there for the game in Minnesota, but I remember that.
Well, travel was crazy. It was demanding, and difficult and hard, but also, great. Like you said, we got to see a lot of things, and you got to see some of the most historic sporting events, in our lifetime. Was it tempting to just take things for granted, or did you ever feel like there were times where you realize, wow, this is unbelievable?
Oh, well, yeah. And it was, sometimes you had to really work at that, because being at some of the great moments, as you would well know, on deadline meant those were some of the worst moments.
Oh, yeah.
Professionally. Now, they were great moments for people to watch and great memories, but you look back on them as nightmares. And the one that comes to mind first and always will is Kirk Gibson's home run in the World Series, one of the great moments in World Series history. And everybody thinks back on that and, gee, what a great thing that was to watch. Well, so here I am in Dodger Stadium, and I'm writing a story. And as I mentioned earlier, my story was due 5 minutes after the game, and I had sent it in. And so I'm on the phone ready to dictate how the game ends, a paragraph, and the story's going to be done. Boom. And then all of a sudden, Kirk Gibson comes limping out of the dugout. Some great moments, you get a couple of minutes, you kind of see it coming. You get a whiff of it. That one, you had no idea what was. First of all, he wasn't even supposed to play, and he limps up there, and his first 2 pitches, he looks like he couldn't hit a beach ball. And then all of a sudden, he hits the thing into the right field stands, and you have a great dramatic moment. And I have 25-inch story that has suddenly become worthless in about 4.5 minutes to fix it. Tick, 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 tick. So I was privileged to be there, but I wish I would have been anything but a sports writer at that point.
Yep, the old saying, great game, I wish I could have seen it.
Yeah, and wish you had, 15 minutes. I would have sold myself for 50. The problem, as you well know, is you write that and you butcher it because you only have 240 seconds to write something, but your name's on it. And the next morning, people who read it and read that maybe you butchered it don't understand you only had 4 minutes to write it. They just see your name on a story that sounds like, you wrote it under anesthesia. So,
No, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I want to stop here a second because you're being too kind. You were known as the fastest gun in the West and the East and the North and the South. I mean, nobody could write on deadline the way that Mike did. And not only write and beat deadline, but write it so well. I mean, I remember the great Steve Weberg, your former colleague, his story. You had like 20 minutes to write a column, and you asked Weberg to read it, and Steve scrolled through it, and then he turned to you and he said, you.
Yeah,
I couldn't write something that good if I had days or hours or days.
Well, thank you. I don't remember a word from that column, but I do remember those 2 words that Weberg said to me. That was after that was when the U.S. lost to the Soviet Union, the Olympics in basketball in Seoul. And I don't even know what the deadlines were. I know they needed it in a hurry. So,
they always need it in a hurry.
I mean, the secret, and most guys did this, and I certainly did it. I would be writing a story. I'd be watching a game. I'd write like 5 versions of it. I'd be working from, and then so as you get to the end, you can kind of zero in on the one that you were the closest to. Now, in most cases, whatever
it's like throwing darts.
Yeah, absolutely. In most cases, the story that ended up you having to write about would be like the worst version. I look back and think, gee, if this team would have won instead of that team, this story sounded a lot better. So,
yeah. So, I still have a column that says the Bengals beat the Steelers in that playoff game a few years ago.
Yeah. I don't keep my columns, but I should have kept a few that never appeared. Like the one from the one where the A's beat the Dodgers in Game 1 of that World Series probably read okay, but not the one where Gibson won with the home run. But and then you get things happen. And 2 times this happened to me. And first time wasn't my fault. Second time was half my fault. This was at a playoff game, the Cubs and the Giants. And I don't know if you ever had Coke or any liquid spill on your computer, on your keyboard.
Yes.
But
yes, I have.
I found out what happened that night when it does, at least on the computer I had back then, because it's the 9th inning and I've got the story almost done, and somebody spills Coke on my computer, and for about 30 seconds.
No, wait a minute. Coca-Cola.
Coca-Cola. Yeah. Coca-Cola. Yeah. Or let's say Pepsi to avoid any confusion. Let's say Pepsi.
Yeah. Liquid.
So anyway, I'm looking at my story on the screen thinking, gee, I hope that didn't affect it. And in 30 seconds, it just went, and it's gone. And it's gone. I mean, it's gone for good. And again, there's 2 outs to go in the 9th inning, and so I had to pick up the phone and dictate that one too. Not under anesthesia, but I had to dictate that story. So I know how bad that was. Well, let's flash later to a bowl game in the Fiesta Bowl. So I'm sitting outside. Well, they have a lot of the press outside on a row beneath the second deck of the stands. Sitting above us were fans. Well, we're in the 4th quarter, pretty late in the game, and somebody upstairs had knocked over a soda cup. And like out of 100 media people sitting in the row below, who was the lucky guy that cup nailed my computer dead on? And that's what happened. And now I knew from the previous experience, I had about 30 seconds. Did you ever try to memorize a story in 30 seconds? I mean, I looked at the screen trying to remember what I had written because I knew I was going to have to dictate it. And that's exactly what happened.
It started off with, it was a dark and stormy night.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the one I always keep in reserve there.
I think it was your competitor who hired a fan to aim the Coca-Cola and drop it onto your computer. I wouldn't put it past another sports writer.
I've never been guilty of a felony, but had I found that person who did that, I would have been,
From DNA testing to the Dixie Mafia, Crime Capsule brings you new stories of true crime in American history. I'm your host, Benjamin Morris. Join us for exclusive interviews with authors from Arcadia Publishing, writing the hottest books on the most chilling stories of our country's past. You can find us wherever you get your favorite podcasts or on evergreenpodcasts.com. Crime Capsule. History so interesting, it's criminal.
I think one time you told me you covered a boxing match, and you said I had my win column and I had my. Tell us what this was.
Well, this noted fight expert that I am. This is in Vegas, and so I'm writing these. I had never really covered much boxing before, so I'm writing these two. If this guy wins, I'm ready with this. If this guy wins, I'm ready with this. I'm feeling pretty good. I said, there's only two ways this can go, and I've got two stories ready to go. And the announcer goes into the ring and takes the microphone and goes, "We have a draw." Well, somehow the prospect of a draw had never entered my empty mind, and so I didn't have a lot done on that one, and maybe that's the reason why I didn't cover a lot of boxing.
Sometimes you did have a little time to write. I think you were at the 86 Masters, for example, right?
Yeah, and that's one where the deadline wasn't the issue. The guy sitting next to me spoke for me and lots of people in that press building when Nicklaus wins at age 46. And it is such a moment, and the atmosphere is so electric, and the achievement is so great. He said, "I don't know if I'm up to writing this." And I felt the exact same way, that no matter how much time I had, could I do that justice? And that was one of the, probably the greatest things I ever covered as far as just feeling the importance of it. I mean, obviously when you're at championship games, you feel the importance of a title, but, to see that man do that on that stage was something really special.
What was the emotion like on the course? Were you out on the course at all?
Some. As you well know, you get to the last stages of a golf tournament on Sunday, you really need to be in the press building because that's the only way you can follow everything on TV. And so, but I was out there earlier and for some of it, and I remember how Greg Norman described that day, and it was perfect because he was playing behind Nicklaus. And you know what it's like at Augusta when you just hear these roars off in the distance and somebody has done something great. And he described the day roar after roar after roar. And that's what it was. Mm-hmm. I mean, you just stood there and it's like thunder from an approaching storm where you hear a class of thunder and then a few minutes later you hear another and another, and they're getting ever louder as it gets closer. That's exactly what it was like that. And so there is not another stage in sports where probably someone is any more beloved than Jack Nicklaus was at Augusta, or Arnold Palmer or Woods or anyone like that. And to see him do that and see people react to it again, it's I could have had a year to write that and still would have felt like I didn't have enough time to do it justice.
Yeah, I think sometimes when you think about all the different events and games and things that you cover, I know for myself, it's not necessarily the scores or the statistics or even exactly what happened from years ago. It's just the raw emotion.
Yeah, and the people. I mean, to me, when people, you like sports, well, I like sports because I like people in it, and just the different personalities and the different stories, and that's what makes the Olympics so great. I mean, probably one of my most memorable moments in covering anything had nothing to do with an athlete, and it was at the Atlanta Olympics, and because I was the first print guy to interview Richard Jewell.
Oh, wow.
What happened there, he was...
Well, tell us about Richard Jewell.
Richard Jewell. They had the bombing, and he was the security guard who found the backpack and was moving people away when the thing blew up. And, so one person was killed in the explosion, and if he doesn't move people away, it probably kills 100. And I'm not sure they can continue those Olympics if that happens. So this is a man, on the face value, you look at it, you think, okay, this nobody knows, save the Olympics. So the Sunday morning, I wanted to talk to him. He's the guy I wanted to talk to. Well, I found out he was at CNN. So I found out where their guest entrance is. It was in the 4th floor of their parking garage. So I'm going to wait for him outside the entrance. And I'm thinking, well, this will be fairly soon. 4 hours later, he still hasn't come out because they kept waiting for his slot to come up because they had so much breaking news and everything. He's in their green room or whatever. And I'm thinking, the clock is ticking toward deadline, but I wanted to stay there. So finally I see this guy, squat little guy, walking out of the door, and it's Richard Jewell. And I interview him in the parking garage. It's like Deep Throat from Watergate.
Wow.
So I do a story about, this kind of common guy being the hero. So I write the column. And 2 days later, I'll always remember this. I was at Modern Pentathlon writing about that. And I look up at the TV in the press room, and they talk about Richard Jewell's become a suspect because the motive thinking that he would do something heroic and get all this kind of attention. Well, if that happened, I would have been one of the first fish on his hook. And so I had to obviously write another column. I was very careful in how I wrote it and saying, look, we don't know yet. I hope I wasn't taken in by this, but we don't know anything yet. Well, a lot of other places really jumped the gun on that. And as we all know, the story turned out that no, he wasn't the suspect. And a lot of people prematurely reported that. And I remember getting a call from his lawyer long after saying, we wanted to tell you, we thought you were very fair. We are going to take legal action against a lot of people in the business, but we're not going to take legal action against you because we thought you were fair. And then I ended up talking to Richard Jewell 3 or 4 times after that, and actually was supposed to have dinner with him in Atlanta, and he died. So that moment, I always remember just standing in that parking garage in the CNN parking garage, having no idea what I was headed into, but it was certainly the fascinating part of sports that had nothing to do with sports itself. But those are the kind of people. I mean, again, you were at the Olympics. You meet people like that all the time. I mean, people you feel, again, to use your word earlier, privileged.
I think there was a guy, wasn't there? You told me once about a Korean wrestler.
Wrestler who had never slept on a bed.
Yes.
And he was so poor. And Korea did like every country did. They had a system in place. If you won a gold medal, you got a bunch of money. And so I interviewed him the day he won a gold medal, and he got, I forget what it was, roughly $50,000 US, whatever that turned in their currency. And so I'm talking to a guy who's going to get a chance at the age of 20-something to sleep in a bed for the first time because he had suddenly hit the jackpot. So, moments like that. In Sydney, while the Olympics were going on there was a movie playing in downtown Sydney about the Munich attack one day in September. And it was on the Israeli team in 1972. So I decided the story I wanted to do on that is to find somebody from the Israeli team who was in Sydney to go to that movie with me. And I couldn't make it work to get an athlete, but the guy says, well, we have one of our officials here, a woman who was on that team. Would she do? So, well, yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
So we went to this movie, and I'm sitting next to this woman, and the movie starts, and the first scene is the Israeli team landing, their plane landing in Munich, and the team is coming down the steps. And I hear her next to me say, what a lovely young woman. And I look up there, and it's her on the screen. I mean, this documentary is showing her get off the plane, and I'm sitting next to this lady.
Right next door.
And that moment kind of, I was privileged to have been in a job where I could meet that person and talk to her and get to know her. And we watched the movie, then we talked afterwards, and ended up doing a story with her. So, moments like that, I felt privileged. And so much different than just like you said, the had nothing to do with stats or scores or anything. If you got time for one other Olympic story, a little bit portraying that. There was in Athens, a sprinter for the U.S., Lauren Williams was her name. And her father was Richard, named Richard. And he had he's from Pittsburgh, and he had a serious kidney disease, and he had to take daily dialysis. And so I read about this. I thought, well, I want to do a story on this guy coming to Athens, going because he had to schedule all his treatments in Athens, wants to see his daughter. So I talk to him, and I make arrangements to meet him at his seat to watch her first heat. And so I'm there, and it's getting to be 10 minutes before a race, and he's not there. So I call on the phone. I said, Richard, where are you? And he goes, well, I've got plenty of time. I'm on the subway. She doesn't run for an hour and a half. Well, he had gotten in the wrong time. Oh, so I said, she's taking off for warm-ups right now. So he's going crazy. So I literally it's my first and last time as a play-by-play guy. I have to do the play-by-play of her race to her father on the phone, who had gone from Pittsburgh to Athens and gotten dialysis, but wasn't going to get to see her run because he had the wrong time. Now, that was just first heat. So he was able
I just got chills.
He was able to, I met him later and we were able to talk, and he was able to, she got the silver medal, I think. But that moment I'm on the phone thinking, how can this possibly happen? I'm having to describe to her father this race. I mean, it was kind of a surreal moment.
Wow, the emotion. That's the type of emotion that, again, the great thing about sports is reality television is you just don't know you don't know what the outcome is going to be of the competition, but you also don't know what kind of stories are going to come out of the competition.
Yeah. In Sarajevo, I was talking to the team. I wanted to do a column on a team from Lebanon because the war was raging in Lebanon, Beirut then. And so I'm interviewing their team at their place in Sarajevo at the end of the village. And a guy comes in and is talking to the coach, and the guy gets very emotional. I'm thinking, well, what happened? I asked the translator, and he said, well, he just found out a shell landed in his home in the living room, but his wife is okay. And so, I'm suddenly in the middle of that. And that emotion far, outdistanced anything I was going to see probably in a sporting event that year.
Yeah, I remember in Sydney the emotion of the marathon. It's the last event, and the marathon runners finish in the stadium, and it's right before the closing ceremony, so the place is full. And I can't remember this runner's name, but he was the last guy to finish.
Right.
And when he came into the stadium, like way behind everybody else, everybody had just been sitting there waiting for this guy, like, come on, we want to get to the closing ceremonies. And he came into the stadium, and the place erupted in applause. Yeah. And it was not the kind of like, oh, great, finally. It was more like of support. And then the applause became rhythmic. And the PA announcer was, come on, you can do it. And they was helping the guy around the track finish the very last moment of competition in Sydney. And that's what I remember. I don't remember who won that race. I have no idea. I can't remember. But I remember that seeing that guy, that nameless guy, run around the track with 100,000 people clapping along, trying to urge him to the finish line.
Well, in the Olympics, in the Summer Olympics, my rule of thumb was always, when in doubt, go to track and field, because those were where a lot of the great stories. Now, I violated that one day, and I paid a heavy price. I was thinking, okay, I need to go do something on the women's soccer team because they had become a big, big deal. And so I went to do a story on that, and there was nothing wrong with that. But then I get back to the press room. I always remember that, and I asked somebody, I almost went to track today and said, did I miss anything? And I could tell the look on the face. I was about to hear bad news. And I don't even remember the name of this American, but it was the guy who he was running, I think it might have been the 400, and he pulled up lame on the track, and he was in agony trying to finish, and his father hopped out of the stands to help him to the finish line. Now,
right, the British runner, yeah.
Any idiot could write that story. I mean, if you can't write that story, but not if you're not there. And so when he told me about this, and he kept going on, and I'm just feeling I've made a mistake. I've been in the wrong place again. And that's the thing about the Olympics. As you probably know, there are so many things. One of the big thing was trying to fit, where should I go today? Where's the best story? And so many times you think you pick wrong. I think it was in Sydney when the U.S. beat Cuba for the gold medal in baseball. Tom Lasorda was the manager. And so I decided to go there because then that was a good story. Well, then I'm watching, the computer system there. You can see the results from other sports. That's the night Roland Gardner beat the Soviet guy who had never been beaten in Greco-Roman. I mean, it was a great Cinderella story, but I'm like 30 miles away. So
yeah, me too. I chose wrong also. Earlier in the day, I was standing in the press room with Chuck Culpepper and Joe Posnanski, and we were talking about where should we go, where do you want to go? And I said, I think I'm going to go to the track because Marion Jones is going to win like her 900th gold medal, that whatever. And I went there, and the same thing happened. the greatest wrestling upset ever. So you and I chose wrong.
And not for the first nor the last time. But that's the thing about the Super Bowl. There's only one Super Bowl. You know you were in the right stadium, or the World Series. The Olympics, you never know if you're in the right place, ever.
Right. Well, the thing is, like, even at the Super Bowl, you go there and there's 1,000, media people, and you're trying to figure out, it's almost overwhelming. Like, how am I going to make this, relatable to somebody, right? It's this giant machine. And I think what you always did great was, make it relatable by bringing it down to the individual.
Well, I tried to do something different. I remember like one year at the Super Bowl at L.A., and this would have been, I think, the Denver and the Giants, maybe. I decided, you got these nice hotels and these two quarterbacks that are getting a lot of publicity. What about down the street 3 miles at a high school in Gangland? What's it like for that quarterback? So I picked 3 high schools that were in what you would call some of the most violent racked areas of Los Angeles, in Gangland, Southern California. And I went to each of those high schools and talked to their quarterback, and thought that would be a little bit more, the people would be more interested, or as interested in, what's life like for these guys? Because a 10-minute drive away, you got Joe Montana or whoever going on. So that was quite an experience, especially at one of the high schools I was at. All the players there were wearing jerseys that day, but it wasn't game day. And I talked to the coach, and he said, well, they're burying one of their teammates today, and he had been killed in a shooting. And I remember talking to the quarterback, and he said, very matter-of-factly, he said, well, here's some of our team rules. If during our practice we hear gunfire, we hit the dirt. I mean, he said that as naturally as he would say, we have water break every 30 minutes. I mean, that was part of their lives. So those are I try to do at least one of those every Super Bowl, with something that would be really common, beyond the game itself, just something relatable to people. And particularly the best compliment I would ever get from someone, as you well know, most times if someone says, hey, I like your story, it's because you wrote about a team they liked, or you had an opinion they shared. You could have written it in absolutely horrible grammatic setup, but they'd like it because when someone would say to me, I like reading you even though I'm not a sports fan,
right,
that meant something to me, because that's what I was trying to do. I didn't. It's a good thing I'm not writing so much nowadays, because metrics and I don't get along all that well. I understand their value, but I don't want to have a metric, fill my story. I want human interest stuff to fill the story and talk about people and their stories. And so that's what I always tried to do.
One of my favorites that you did was, the ABC Wide World of Sports, the great image of the ski jumper falling as the face of the Agony of Defeat. You actually found that guy, right?
When I heard that this guy lived in Sarajevo, when I heard he lived like 20 minutes away, I said, I've got to find this guy. I mean, millions of people, and they have no idea who he was. When I talked to him, he had only recently learned how famous he was. Someone had sent him a tape of a Wide World of Sports, and he looked at that's me at the beginning. He's falling down a mountain. And he talked about that, and he got up from that. I mean, if people have ever seen that, it looked like you'd have to pick him up with a whisk broom, like in about 10 pieces. Well, he told me that he missed a rock of a huge boulder by about 2 feet, and had he hit that boulder, we wouldn't have been talking then, and that wouldn't have been ABC. Yeah, that was guys like that. I mean, that was at the one in Albertville in France. I decided to find, because that was a very active French resistance area during World War II. And I thought, well, maybe do a story on that if I find anybody who could knows about that. Well, the guy who was the sector chief of the resistance in Albertville was still alive. And so I went to his house. He's 92 years old. We talked 45 minutes. He was on a exercise bike all 45 minutes at the age of 92.
92?
And so we're talking about what it was like. This is the Olympic City with all this going on. And we're talking about what it was like back then. And he showed me this book of all these names of his friends and dates next to him. And I said, what were the dates? And he said, those were the dates they were shot. So, those are the kind of stories I like to do and tie them into sports some way. But I always try something that normal people, whether they like sports or not, might get something out of reading. When the NBA Finals were in Oklahoma City, so it was the first big, to my mind, the first big national spotlight on Oklahoma City since the bombing. When you think about the bombing, at least when I think about the bombing, I think about the picture of the fireman holding the little girl.
Yeah.
Well, I found the fireman. Oh. And he was still a fireman, and he talked about what that meant to him. He was also which always helped tie into sports part, he was also a huge Thunder fan. So that kind of fit into that. But I wanted to, we're in Oklahoma City and everyone's talking about Oklahoma City. The last time there were this many cameras in Oklahoma City, that's what was happening. So I always try to do one of those, at least one of those every major event. Is there one that is your favorite? When you think about the mosaic of your career, is there one chip that still sticks out in your mind? Probably. I'm going to have to sit there a minute and think about that one. I think the one that was most emotional was Dan Jansen. He was an Olympic speed skater, and in Calgary, 1988, he skated the day his sister died back in the U.S. of leukemia, and he was on the phone with her that day, literally in some of her last moments. And so he skated that night, and he fell. And the absolute agony of all he had gone through. Now, flash 4 years later to Albertville, and he won. He won the race, and he skated around, made his victory lap, holding his little girl who was named after his sister. The emotion of that moment, for some reason, and I talked to him afterwards, but I wasn't the only one. I mean, it wasn't Dan and me. It was Dan and me and about, obviously a lot of media were on that one. But just the emotion of that moment is as powerful a thing as I think I've ever been around on what sports could mean and how it was an example of the trajectory of this guy's life from one of his worst moments to one of his best. Things like that. A moment that kind of sticks with you that, gee, how did I end up with this? In Torino, the ski jumping, the big power in ski jumping was Poland. And I worked out a way that I could watch the ski jumping with Lech Walesa, who was the president of Poland. And amazing. Because I figured, well, this guy's, that's their sport. And he was also obviously world famous because the guy who kind of led Poland back from the Iron Curtain. So, that's a day that sticks with me. Just experiences and all that. And in Beijing, I decided to go to work on a bicycle because all people my age think about when we thought about Red China, back in the 60s, were people on bikes. And I remember biking through Tiananmen Square. That's a moment that lives with me. So those are some of the things. Didn't you find a photographer? Yeah, the famous picture of the guy standing in front of the tank. I tried to find the guy standing in front of the tank. And I went through every Chinese refugee group you could possibly think of. No one knows where this guy is. He could very well be dead for decades. So plan B was to find the guy who took the picture of the guy standing in front of the tank. And that was interesting because the thing about that made it interesting. He was in this hotel ready to take the picture. He was out of film. And only because there were some American students there on a field trip and some of them had extra film did he get that to take that picture that ran all over the world. And still you see it all over the world. If that student didn't happen to have extra film, that picture would never have been taken. Well, we know that because you took the extra mile, that's what I think about. You waited outside in the parking garage. You waited 4 hours for Richard Jewell. You always went the extra mile. And I think you took us with you, you went on all these trips, you went all these places, and then you found ways to put us there beyond just who won the game. That's what I thought my mission was. There were lots of people out there who could tell better than I could who won the game and why. I had to do that a lot of my time. but if I wanted to do anything, I wanted to take people there to meet people they normally wouldn't have gotten to meet, and a little bit about spend a few minutes with their story. And so that's what I tried hardest at. And I'm trying to do that no matter what the event. The Olympics certainly lent themselves to that, but you could do that on other events, well, the Super Bowl, World Series. I was always trying to look for at least one or two of those way beyond the box score.
Well, you did it as well as anyone, Mike, and you're still writing. You're still doing it. And you're doing it, and you're beating deadline with 2 fingers, right? You only type with 2 fingers. Is that right?
Yes. My typing teacher from high school, if he's still around, if he ever saw me working on a story, would just be appalled. I guess, we all have something on our obit, what's going to be, and mine will be Mike Lopresti, the guy who typed with 2 fingers, .
Well, it'll be much better than that because you made us all feel part of sports in the last 4+ decades, and we really appreciate you sharing the stories with us here. Deadline calls. But it's been a great ride with you and really enjoyed hearing some of the places you've been and the stories you told and just catching up with you, Mike. I miss you.
Yeah, same here. It's what I miss from our old days are the people. You're one of them. I mean, just the people you met in the press box and you shared tough moments with professionally. Those were among the most invaluable things from my career that I'll always remember. And yeah, you're right. I do miss some time.
Thanks, Mike. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Press Box Access. You can find us here with a new episode every other Wednesday. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe and follow us on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcast app. We'd love for you to review us. 5 stars would be nice. Follow us on social media. Drop us an email at pressboxaccess@gmail.com. And be sure to spread the word. Everyone is welcomed here. This has been a production of Evergreen Podcast. A special thank you to executive producers Michael D'Aloia and Gerardo Orlando, producer Sarah Wilgrube, and our audio engineer Dave Douglas. I'm your host, Todd Jones. It's closing time. Rock on.
From DNA testing to the Dixie Mafia, Crime Capsule brings you new stories of true crime in American history. I'm your host, Benjamin Morris. Join us for exclusive interviews with authors from Arcadia Publishing, writing the hottest books on the most chilling stories of our country's past. You can find us wherever you get your favorite podcasts or on evergreenpodcasts.com. Crime Capsule. History so interesting, it's criminal.